Welcome back to Game Design Breakdowns. This week we're going to be talking about the game that I made, Run and Gun. If you haven't watched our previously game design breakdowns, you can go back and watch our ones on fighting games, which covers basically the foundation of fighting games, and Guilty Gear Strive, which covers the mechanics and in-depth look at Guilty Gear Strive's game design. But I wanted to go a little more back to my roots and show you guys what I made, how my process worked when I was making Run and Gun, and how our design really influenced and translated into gameplay and then making this game overall. So if you don't know what Run and Gun is, it is a skater shooter type game inspired by like Tony Hawk, where you run around and you shoot robots in an arena. It is free to play on Steam. You can go check it out now. Also, a lot of the materials and documents that I will be showing in this video are also available on this Not a Sport website, so you can go check those out and go over them yourself, or you can go over them here with me in the video. So the first thing we did once we came up with the idea of Run and Gun was we had to make a pitch. So this is our pitch document of what we were pitching to really our class and to our teacher on what the type of game we wanted to make. So we have our X statement, and the X statement is essentially what the game is in one sentence. And our X statement is skate and shoot to survive waves of robots, augment your movement and weapons to become the RNG champion. Which, in retrospect, that's what we went out and that's what we made. It's a skate, shoot, surviving waves of robots, and you can augment by picking up different types of power-ups to make your movement and weapons more powerful in order to survive and win the game. We had a scope. This is our first scope for really our first semester. We wanted one level, 2 enemies, 1 boss, 3 weapons total, and 3 power-ups. Now, some of this got cut. For example, we did not end up having a boss in the game, even though we did design a boss fight, which I'll be showing last in this video. We did have more than 2 enemies, we did have more than 3 power-ups, and we did have more than 3 weapons total in the game. But we generally hit our scope for the first time around. We had an audience. This is just kind of formalities that we had really for people. We wanted it to be on PS4, PS5, Xbox, Nintendo, Switch, and PC. Obviously, those 3 platforms being the consoles did not end up being a reality, but it did end up going for PC, and it did end up going on Steam. We had an audience of 13 plus. This is just, kind of a plug-in number that we chose. And the game was made for people who like Twitch shooters, shooting up in sports action games. That was kind of our core audience in terms of who this game was designed for. We had a play background as well. This was just simply kind of a story of just like what the player, who they were and what they were doing. In the grand scheme of things, this didn't really matter in this type of game. Our game was just fun arena shooter. It had no real story or plot or lore to it, but we ended up kind of just making this just to throw it in there. Play tasks is probably one of the most important aspects of the game, where what we wanted the player to do when playing our gameplay. We had skate around, which they are doing in terms of movement if you go and watch videos of the game. Grabbing power weapons, so there is a power weapon. We had our swords, and players could pick that up and use it to their will. Shooting robots, we had robots. You had shooting, you just go to town on them and you shoot them up. Avoid getting blasted, which means like avoid getting hit by projectiles or mines and things like that we added to the game. And augments that would change up the weapons and the movement of the game and in your playstyle. Let players shape their own playstyle was kind of our play task and what we wanted players to do. So we showed off in our pitch just where our inspiration came from. We looked at games like CSGO Surfing was a big one. where we want to, be able to surf and ride, movement a lot, very smooth like movement. Tony Hawk, Skater, Lucio, as you see here, can also be a example that we had. We want it to be like physics-based movement. The environment, we want the environment to be like a skate park meets kind of an arena, so kind of half and half in terms of environment that you're playing in. We actually ended up having two maps. This falls really into our first map, where it's more arena skate parky, and our second map, which is more skate parky, realistic like facility. That was kind of the design goal when we designed both of these maps. We wanted one to be very heavily skate park theme, and the other one to be more in line with your standard first-person shooter. Combat. We had combat inspired. We wanted to like pick up weapons so you can choose your own loadout to defeat your enemies. We wanted each weapon to feel meaningful, meaning that some weapons would be better at handling other enemies than others. Originally, our design choice was that we were only going to have two weapons, so the player could only have their pistol and either a sniper, shotgun, or AK, or the power weapon. But as time went on with development, we realized that this wasn't really fun, and we wanted to give the players as much tools as possible within our sandbox, so they were able to just pick up all the weapons and swap between them to use them to their will and fit their playstyle overall. Augments. This was our big system that would change up gameplay and let players define what they want to do in their game and their play style through different augments that would change up weapon play. So meaning a gun would fire faster or fire slower or do more damage or go through walls, for example. And then an augment that would change player behavior, meaning that you could jump higher or slide faster or grind on walls for longer, things like that. And then augments that would change up bullet behavior, which would be like bullets would ricochet, for example, and just give more power-ups or like damage, for example, give players more damage. And this would allow the players to pick their own loadout, similar to how you would pick your loadout but in a Call of Duty game while playing the game. And you could choose and mix and combine different augments to make a playstyle that was more befitting to you. That was the goal of the augment system. So we had games that like you compare it to. We chose Doom, Jet Set Radio, and Resign. So these are games that we took inspiration from, or could be competitors, you could say. We also had what our inspiration for like our robots or other games. So just like this was a dynamic list of how many robots and different things that we can make within the game. And then we were really ahead of the curve in terms of what we wanted our game to look like, which really helped with the design process of how guns will operate, on how robots would function, and how their AI would look like. So we were really ahead on the art style, and having that visual sense really helped with designing the systems behind the game overall. This also went on to UI as well. So having a visual sense of what enemies would look like and what we wanted the game to actually look like in the hands of players helped with how UI would interact with players and the game and its systems as well, and demonstrate what the players could see and receive with the information through the UI. Again, there's some other small things. We had some music samples of what we want our music to sound like in the game. And then we had kind of like development goals of where we would be at, what would be our like core problems with the game and what we would be focusing on throughout development. And then we had this fun little X video just to top it all off, just to give an visual idea on what we wanted the game to be like. And we chose Speed Racer for this, and you see you're running around, racing around, shooting robots, casters, hyping you up, and you're picking up augments, and it would change the way that you would play the game. And that was kind of our example of our pitch. So now that we have the pitch, right, we have to set out and do that. This document right here is probably the most important document in the development of Run and Gun. This is our game development document, and this document's goal is to set defining rules on every single aspect of the game. So if you wanted to remake this game, if I handed you this document, you could remake the game from the ground up. And just going over it real quick, a lot of this stuff is also in the pitch. A lot of this stuff a lot of people did not see. But you start off with your X statement, which is the same one that we have in our pitch. We have a game summary, of a quick summary of what our game is. If we had to, pitch this to say it to someone, or someone had to understand what the game was at its core, this is the summary, and the X statement is even a shorter summary of that. Then we had our gameplay narrative, which is, I believe, a little bit out of date, but you can see this. It is a long wall of text. Essentially what it is it is a what we think the player will go through when they play the game. So we give the example of Sally. So Sally will, download Run and Gun. She'll hit play on Steam. Then she'll see our title screen. The title screen will introduce her to an options menu. It will introduce her to the title of the game. It will have a play button, and it will have an exit button, for example, right? Those are bare minimum things that you will see in your game. So this is the design of the title screen. So what does Sally then do from there? Well, she'll hit play, right? And then the play button will lead to a menu that shows different maps or different loadouts, or different difficulties, for example. And then she'll click the difficulty that she wants, and she'll be loaded into the game. Then if we want like a cutscene to open, it will explain the cutscene of the game, or a tutorial of the game, and it will walk you through. It was walking through Sally's actions as she goes through that tutorial of the game, or the first really introduction section of the game, and what her actions will be as she plays the game. That's kind of the point of a gameplay narrative. It's a written format of showing what the player is doing when they're playing your game. From there, we have just some very basic things. Art concepts, it will be next. So we'll go into like how our art will influence the game, our themes of the game. We want it to be futuristic, robots, very colorful, a sports arena, and cartoony. I think we all kind of nailed that. If you look at our screenshots of the game, it's very futuristic, cartoony. It's in an arena of robots. We had that. Those were our goals with hitting our themes within the game. Our marketing, again, we were marketing plan on how we wanted it to market our game, who we wanted to market it to, how we were get it out there to the public, and people were going to get it, how people were going to play it and get it in the hands of people. This was more formality. Again, this is not how it ended up being. How it ended up being is that we posted it on Steam, and then I pretty much went to town and published it on social media. I went to Reddit, I went to different sites and said, hey, this is our game, check it out. Try to get word of mouth, tell my friends, tell other people's family, get my other co-workers or peers to do the same. And that's how we really got the game out there and get as many eyeballs on the game as possible, because we didn't have a huge marketing budget. We weren't buying billboards or anything like that. So moving on, we have design pillars. Design pillars are very, very important, because these are basically the foundation of our game. So we have shooting, movement, loot, and PvE, so player versus environment. Those are the foundation of our games, that our game must have shooting. It has some sort of shooting mechanic. It is a shooter. It's really movement heavy, so we really want to focus on movement. We want the loot to feel good, so when you pick up new weapons and new augments, we want that to feel good for the player. And we want it to have a challenging and engaging player versus environment, where the player is interacting with enemies and interacting with the waves and different things like mines and explosive barrels. So from those 4 core pillars, and I like to generally choose 4, we chose sub pillars. So for example, with shooting, you'd have to have 5 guns. The game was strictly hip fire. We decided early on that there was going to be no aim down sights or ADS in the game. It was going to be strictly only hip fire, except later on we kind of went back on that, and the only exception to that is the sniper rifle. Gun mods, we had to have mods at the time. They're called mods, before we called them augments, to modify the gun's gameplay. With movement, we had to have jumping, we had to have sliding. We really originally wanted to have dashing, but that didn't really end up making it into the game because we ran out of time. And we wanted it to really feel like you're skateboarding or ice skating. This kind of proposed the problem with, I think, people really wanting to know, like, are you on a skateboard or are you on roller skates? From a design standpoint, we were thinking that, like, and I was thinking, well, it doesn't really matter. But a lot of players kind of really want to know that. I think learning a lesson from this is, like, you want to have some sort of established, just basic stories so players understand, oh, okay, I'm on roller skates and I'm skating around. They just want to know that, even though in the grand scheme of things it doesn't really matter, but they want to know, their identity of the game. Who am I within this game is, I think, very important for players to know moving forward. Loot. So our loot sub goals moving, we wanted to have rewarding drops, right? So we want to have, when you kill an enemy, you see something shiny drop and you want to pick it up, and it is a good rewarding experience for the player. We want to have guns be loot drops, meaning that once you pick up a new gun, you feel more powerful and more useful than you did before. And then again, going back to augments, we want to have weapon modifications where it augments the loot, where loot, drops, and it augments your gameplay, essentially. Those were our goals for our loot pillars. And then PvE, we want to have 3 types of enemies at least. We want to have a boss, which again sadly didn't end up making it, and we want to have waves of huge hordes of enemies just bombarding you from left and right, forcing the player to move and adapt and really skate around while shooting these huge, overwhelming hordes of enemies. Right. So, with those pillars, where does that leaves us? Well, it leaves us to core mechanics. And core mechanics are, again, just things that are in the game that we needed. So you have your standard core mechanics that I went over in our previous game design breakdown. We have our movement, which is WASD. We had jumping, we had sliding, we had dashing, which didn't end up making it in the game, but we wanted it. We had shooting, we had a health bar, right? Because we needed to have a win-lose condition for players. We had weapon swapping, meaning you can swap between your weapons, meaning you can have a pistol and then you can go to your sword. At the time, we're still in the idea of having only 2 weapons for the player before we added the whole weapon wheel, and you can have any weapon that you want. You have all the weapons in the game. We want the player to pick up weapons in their main hand. We want players to pick up and swap gun mods, meaning they could swap between different augments on the fly when they drop. We wanted a final boss, which was going to be our huge win con. Congratulations, you beat the game. We wanted it to have PvE mobs, meaning that AI mobs that come in and attack the player. And originally we wanted also to have co-op, meaning that you could play with a friend. But again, we ran out of time to really develop those features within the game. Then from there we had our detailed mechanics and more systems within the game. Rechargeable ammo was a huge one for us. We didn't want players to run out of ammo. We wanted the ammo to recharge over time, and we wanted it to be visually shown on the weapons rather than in the UI. This was a decision, really a challenge that we wanted in the game, just to make our game stand out compared to your standard shooter and not make it more too generic. This had problems where a lot of players didn't really understand like where their ammo was, how they could tell how much ammo they had. and really design problems that we ended up having to have to fix within time by showing within the gun kind of a liquid jelly to show like, okay, that's your ammo when you look at gameplays within the gun. It was a problem that I think still needs to be developed on and fixed, but it is something that we really stand by, where we wanted as much UI as possible to be shown within the game and not on the screen or on a HUD. We have players just start with pistols. That was our defining rules within the waves. They had to start with a pistol and work their way up the power scaling with finding new weapons and augments. Enemies to spawn in waves, so we wanted that. We had 3 types of enemies. We wanted a drone, which would be kind of your light type of enemy. We wanted a walker, which would be your standard type of enemy. And we wanted a tank to be your beefy type of enemy. More on that kind of later in this list. Enemies can damage the player and kill the player, resulting in a game over. After X or I waves, a player will move to the boss level, spawn in the center of the arena. This was, if our boss was still there. If the boss is defeated, it results in a victory, so the player won and they become the champion of running gun. We want 5 guns total. The pistol is always equipped and can be swapped for different weapons. This was again kind of a philosophy of having 2 weapons only. Players can pick up an assault rifle, shotgun rifle, similar to the it's supposed to be DMR to Halo, which is supposed to be a semi-auto kind of rifle, and a power weapon in their main hand. Weapons have a chance to drop from enemies on a set rotation. Again, we ended up actually scrapping a lot of this and changing up a lot of the weapon systems within the game. So the weapons would drop for you would always get an AR first, then a shotgun, then a rifle, then the power weapon, and then it would just repeat from it. And they would always drop from enemies, the weapons. But instead, we ended up having just kind of drop points on the map where you just go up and you pick up the weapons that you want, and they're on a timer. Or the pickup point will choose the weapon randomly, and it will recharge on a timer, and then you pick that up. You can see this in examples if you play the game within our first map. It has a random pickup weapon timer in like the center, where in the center of the map it may start with the power weapon, it may start with the AK, it may start with the shotgun, and it takes a minute for it to recharge, and you pick it up and you have that weapon, and then it'll move on to the next weapon. Where in the second level we have individual points where AKs on the left side, snipers on the right, shotguns in the middle, power weapons up high, where players can go and find them and pick them up. And then the player has 3 slots for 3 different mods. We'll talk about that later when we get to augments as well. Each mod has a respective category, so we categorized our mods being A, B, and C. Mods categorized under A will replace mods in A. In the A slot, B will replace the B slot, and C will replace the C slot. Mods are attached to the player, not the gun. So this was a talk that we had internally, where do we want the mods or the augments to show up visually on the gun? Meaning if you swap guns, would you get a different set of mods? And we decided no, we wanted it to be attached to the player, which is why they are in the HUD and the UI. After a set amount of kills, a drone flying by on the map will drop gun mods. So originally we had kind of an idea of a drone flying around, and it would drop of weapons for you and resources for you if you shot it. This didn't end up happening in the game. Instead, again, we went with our weapon points and augments dropping from enemies. Here we have player controls. We just wanted to standardize our player controls. WASD, space for movement. Control was our break and slide. Shift was going to be our dash. Q was going to be a special ability. Later on, I'll talk about that when we go into augments. And we have 1 to 2 weapons that you could switch between. Mouse wheel would change the weapons. Mouse button 1 would fire, and mouse button 2 would zoom in. Movement mechanics, again, we had a slide, dash, wall run, rail grind, ledge grind, grabbing, which you would grab the ledge if you were too low. And then we have our general enemy design. So what were our goals in our design for our enemies? So our drone, which is our standard kind of drone flying enemy, they're very weak. They fly. fire after 3 seconds of targeting the player. They have a laser type weapon. They are weak, so that's low HP. They have strength in numbers, meaning their goal is to have a lot of them to overwhelm the player. And they try, again, our last point is they try to overwhelm the player, which you can see a lot within our trailers. For example, where we have the drone enemy and there's just a lot of them following you and trying to overwhelm you and get around you and surround the player throughout gameplay and throughout the round, right? That was the goal of the drone enemy. Then we had the walker. A walker was our standard vanguard type enemy. It runs at you, it fires a bullet type weapon at you, it tries to flank the player, and it's very fast. This was your standard enemy that most of the time you would be approaching and trying to tackle. Here is an example of our walker enemy. You know, they're getting around you, they're trying to flank you. They are your standard go-to enemy within run and gun. And the final enemy that was being developed before the boss was the trapper. So the trapper, it's a ground unit. It places environmental traps, meaning it has a bomb trap, which will explode. It has a knockback trap, which will knock you back, and a slow trap, which will slow you down. It places it at locations, set locations and chokers, or choke points, so the player will have to run into them. This actually didn't end up being the thing in the final product. What the trapper robot will do, it'll avoid the player, and it'll just set mines on a set path, but it does a lot of mines and kind of overwhelms the player with environmental traps, which the player can then shoot to destroy, for example, instead of it. It repairs other units. That didn't really get around to doing that feature either. It doesn't attack the player directly. That is true. It does not attack the player. It tries to avoid the player and run away from the player. It gives other units armor and shields. We didn't get around to that feature either. It tries to avoid the player, as I've said. And really, the idea for this unit's design was to be a support unit. It was meant to support the other units and really be just a menace that the player would have to track down like a rat. It wasn't supposed to attack the player head on. It was supposed to avoid the player and set him up for failure. That was the idea of the trapper. And then finally we had the boss, which didn't end up being a thing, but we'll talk about the boss later. Environmental mechanics, we had jump pads in the game to give player a bit more movement to get to more areas of the map. We had we didn't get around to slow barrels actually, but we did get around to explosive barrels, which you can group up enemies around them and you can shoot them and it will wipe out a lot of enemies in the vicinity. We didn't get around to teleporters either, but we did get around to grind rails to really incentivize the Tony Hawk skating feeling of the game, where now you can grind on different rails and different pathways to traverse the map. You can see that in our video, I believe right here, where now you have a rail that will take you up or take you down or take you around the map. Our weapon mechanics. So, and this video is going kind of long, so I'm just going to cover this and kind of finish this doc, and then we will go on to the next episode or part of this show. Anyway, our weapon mechanics. What were the goals of the weapons? What were they designed to do? Because we wanted each weapon to be able to defeat another enemy more efficiently than other weapons. We wanted the other weapons to have positive effects, and it also have a negative effect. So the pistol's goal was had extremely low damage, it had medium fire rate, it had low ammo, and essentially was a pea shooter. It was supposed to start you out and just pew pew, get through a couple waves, and then never be used again. That was the goal of the pistol. And then once you get upgrade, you have the assault rifle, which has very low damage but a very high fire rate. It has a lot of ammo. It's supposed to be your laser type weapon, which means it's supposed to be kind of pinpoint accuracy, which means it's supposed to fire straight, and it's supposed to be like a medium to long range weapon, or medium to short range weapon actually, and it does bonus damage versus targets that have armor. Our shotgun was our high damage when close, medium damage when far, had a medium fire rate, had medium ammo, it fires in a cone, and it does a lot of damage when close. It does bonus damage to shields as well. This was your go-to weapon if you were being surrounded and they were very close to you. You want to pull out the shotgun. Our rifle, for example, has high damage, a very low fire rate, low ammo, very long range, and can zoom in. This was our sniper rifle, and it was good for, sniping those little pesky trapper robots if they're on the other side of the map, or, posting out on a high vantage point and trying to, pick off some enemies before they come and get you, for example. That was the goal of the sniper rifle. And then our power weapon. Our power weapon was just there for pure fun, to get you out of a bad situation. It was a one shot. It one shots every enemy in the game. It's melee. It's our only melee weapon in the game. And it has X amount of charges, I believe 6, so you can only use it 6 times to get out of a bad or sticky situation. And then you have to pick it up again. Where all the other weapons recharge, the power weapon did not. It was supposed to be OP, it was supposed to be super strong, it was supposed to be just a pure fun weapon that you took out and went to town with. That was the goal of the power weapon. And it was mouse button 1 to swing. Finally, we have our armor and shield mechanics. So armor and shield mechanics, basically it would cut your damage in half, where some enemies had armor, and if you had armor piercing rounds, like with the example, the AK, for example, you would do normal damage to them. But if you chose another weapon, you would not do normal damage to them, and vice versa for shields. So we can see here, like, shielded targets take reduced damage from normal/armor rounds, but increased damage from shielded rounds. And then armored targets take reduced damage from normal/shielded rounds, but damage is increased from armored rounds. So this was, again, to make the player kind of pick and choose which weapon was better for each job. What weapon was more efficient at killing different enemies and make waves of enemies different from other enemies and give more challenge to the game. This on top of another system in the game where there's actually damage fall off with a lot of weapons because of the shotgun, really made you want to swap between weapons, and that was the goal of the game. The design goal of the weapon system is to get players to swap between weapons, so they're just not on the pistol or the AK 24/7. They were swapping and swapping and swapping, very similar to how you would watch a pro speed run of Doom, where they are swapping between each and every weapon. And Doom does that through its ammo economic system, through how the player gets ammo and how each weapon is more efficient at killing different types of enemies. So a lot of inspiration came from Doom within the weapon system there. Finally, and we went over this, inspiration for our games, Borderlands, gun style, Tony Hawk, Ghost Rider, and then we had just some miscellaneous things that we want to go over. Our vertical slice goals, we wanted our 5 weapons to be in there and 3 power-ups to be in there as well. Some mechanic systems that we were defining, not going to have, no ADS, no shop. These are things that we talked about very earlier on that we just decided not to have. So with that being further done, this has been kind of a long episode. That's the base foundation of production within what we wanted our game to be when we were designing the game, and then how we had to change that and inspired on that, and how it evolved through development I'll talk about in the next episode. So with that out of the way, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our previous game design breakdowns as well. That is in our playlist or on our YouTube channel and our website as well. Make sure to check that out if you want to read a really in-depth guide on how we developed Run and Gun. That is in the blog website, or the blog part of our website, so you definitely check that out if you are interested in that sort of game design and how our process was going, how our process of developing the game over the course of 2 semesters in school. That is all on the blog on website, so check that out. Link is all in the description below. With further ado, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you're having a wonderful climb, and I will see you in the next part.